Hey y'all, I'm not in a quiet space. I've got people around, wife, partners, people that love me, kids bouncing off the walls. I wanted to take a moment to talk about Poly Living Philadelphia, specifically the keynote for Poly Living Philadelphia. I know there's a couple other things that popped up over the course of the weekend that I'm gonna make further content about, but the keynote itself was sort of a thing. Um, there's some pictures around, and I'm actually pretty into it, about how I was sitting for the keynote. When I got to the room for the opening circle and everything, the first thing I looked was to see if there was a podium, because I always feel a little bit exposed and weird and out there when I'm just sort of standing, standing open stage, center stage with a mic. I always feel a little weird about it. So I was like, is there a podium? Essentially so I can hide some of myself. And then I've had my phone with me, which had my notes. So I want to hide that I'm holding my phone. There was no podium. So during the whole opening circle, when we were talking about when the host Robin Trask and her daughter Marina were talking about what boundaries and consent and sort of the format of the event. I'm sitting there looking around and looking around and looking around and trying to come up with a solution. And I come up with a solution where there was a lot of empty chairs in the front row. From the second row back, things were packed, but the front row was mostly empty. So as soon as I got called up there for the keynote, I run up there and I grab 3 chairs. And I sit 2 of them side by side, sort of so, facing the crowd, and one of them back to back behind them. So I've got this tripod of chairs, those 3-wheel motorcycles, and I get up on top of them. I take off my shoes and then get up on top of them, and I'm sitting at a sort of a perch, so that people can still see me, but then I can still feel comfortable sitting down, which is a whole thing. And the content of the keynote was about changing the landscape and how easy it is to change the landscape, how easy it is to sort of take ownership of your local community, take ownership of communities in general, and just sort of make it what you want. It's not a hard thing. People call me hardworking, but I don't feel like I do a whole lot. I don't feel like I do anything that anybody else can't just come up and do. I had an interesting enough niche in terms of being black and polyamorous and speaking about race and polyamory, if for no other reason because there weren't a lot of other people who were doing that. But if you were, if you fill out some other identity that doesn't get represented a whole lot, all you got to do is open your mouth and start talking about it, and other people will feel validated by that experience and say yo, I'm glad you're talking about it. Oh, word, you're trans and poly, word, let me come and talk to you because I'm trans and poly and I don't see myself represented. And that was sort of my niche. I've got a race and polyamory book out, but I don't really speak about it as much as I used to, because I feel like I don't want to be boxed in by being the black guy speaking about race or the black guy speaking about race and polyamory. I want it to be known that I'm a black guy who can speak about a lot of different things. I'm gonna bring black to that conversation regardless, because that's who I am, and that's the community that I represent. That's the community that I serve. But I'm also going to talk about parenting. I'm also going to talk about masculinity. I'm also going to talk about my screw-ups. That's another big thing that I brought up during the keynote, is that I don't hide my mistakes. I don't hide them. The funny thing about that is I've actually taken more flack for things I haven't done than for the things that I have done, because for the things that I have done, the mistakes that I've made, I've actually been out there and talking about it. I've put it publicly. I've talked about it on podcasts. I've talked about it here, talked about it there. I've made my apologies to a lot of different people, and meanwhile, I don't take responsibility for the things that I haven't done. So those are the stories that keep getting told. But it doesn't take a whole lot to change the landscape, and I wanted to talk about that for this keynote. And like, it doesn't take a lot to have a platform. It doesn't take a lot to use that platform. Even if your platform is just like your group of friends, you can have that impact. If you put a couple of dollars into somebody's pocket and they've got a project that gets off the ground because you put a couple of dollars in their pocket, that's an impact. All of these things have an impact. I'm not doing anything specifically. I'm not doing anything extraordinary. It's just like, I do things anybody could do, and I talk about that. I live a life anybody can live, and I talk about that. I make mistakes anybody makes, and I talk about that. So changing the landscape, and people got a lot of mileage out of the last line of it, where I said something to the effect of, you don't have to move a mountain to change the landscape. You don't. I'm not doing anything special. Real facts. Something that came up that became a major part of like sort of the discussion of the keynote, and like something to some people even overshadowed the discussion of the keynote, was there was a Q&A session immediately afterwards, and a few people stood up and they said some really moving things. It irks me that I remember what I'm about to talk about more than the fact that people said some really moving and really positive things. A couple of people said that like I had made some changes to their local community. A couple of people said that like I had impacted them personally or professionally in a way, like in a really positive way. And I hate that there was less conversation about those than the fact that somebody came up and tried to like stand up and do a not all white people. A lot of my talk was about race and representation, and how like the work that I've done has made an impact in terms of like creating more inclusive environments, creating more diverse environments, creating more intentional spaces for people of color, more intentional spaces for Black people in polyamory. And somebody, and I'm not going to mention by name because I'm not trying to go hard at anybody in particular, because it's not a person, it's an idea that I'm talking about. Somebody decided they need to stand up and like give a pass or an explanation or a defense of white people or white organizers or white space holders for not being able to create their own inclusive environments. And it's like, we don't need that. And that's exactly what I said. This explanation starts off, and I'm like, I'm like, we don't need that. We don't need another white person to center white feelings, to center white tears, to center themselves in this conversation where there's already like we're already getting the ball rolling. We don't need to center white folks again about how diversity failed or how inclusivity failed. We don't need that. Nobody asked for that. Not a single person. So I'm like, we don't need that. And I'm holding the mic, and they're speaking out loud, and they're like, we don't. But also, can I keep going? I'm like, you're still going. We don't need that. And they just kept going. And I'm like, we don't need that. And I addressed them by name. And then they sat down. And it was interesting in that, like, I handled it that way because, like, this is somebody that I know. This is somebody who's local to me. This is somebody who I've seen in a lot of different spaces. And I tried to shut them down as gently but as firmly as I could. Because if I don't do that, if I shut them down with the way that I feel, I get branded the scary Black guy. They overstepped. They had way more to say than they needed to. I'm holding a microphone. I am the keynote speaker, and I'm trying to defuse this while the whole crowd is groaning around this person, and they're not reading the room. And I've got to make sure that I'm being gentle in a way where I feel like this is disrespectful to me, this is disrespectful to the crowd, and I've got to keep it real chill, because if I don't, I become the scary Black guy. I lose all the effect that I had over the last hour where I was speaking. So that was sort of an interesting thing, and like people came up to me and thanked me for that over the whole weekend. They're like thanking me for the way that I shut it down this whole time, and I'm like, and I'm feeling like, I'm feeling a little awkward about that, because like I want to shut it down hard, like, knock it off. but I can't do that because there's always this perception, there's always this stigma, there's always this stereotype that I'm working against. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that because like there are people who didn't make it to Poly live in Philadelphia. There are people who didn't. There are people who didn't make it. There are people who would have wanted to make it. There are people who aren't aware of how things went down for this thing. So I wanted to like bring up this keynote and how it went down. And like I said, there are other topics that came up over the course of the weekend that I jotted down that I'll make some, another like 5, 10, 15-minute video about later on. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that for a bit. Thank you.